Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking a little bit of your Saturday afternoon to come and join in this conversation. I'm Susan Cousins. I'm from Eastside Friends Meeting, and I am a member of the working group on addressing harm with care from North Pacific yearly meeting. And Theo is another member of that group. Our job is actually to try to raise awareness within yearly meeting of our differences, of the different experiences that we have, so that we can treat each other um, with care that takes into account those differences that we have. And our particular focus in this conversation is on a set of characteristics that sometimes gets labeled disabilities, but we decided to use the actual names of some um, uh, circumstances that people have instead. So it's focused on people with mobility, vision, or hearing challenges and those experiences. So let's start with some introductions and then I will go on and mention a few things from the last time. Um, Heidi, do you want to introduce yourself? Please introduce yourself, your meeting, and then what brought you here.
Sure. So my name is Heidi, she, her from South Seattle Friends Meeting. And I also happen to be the event planner, new this year as the event planner for the NPYM annual session. So I'm learning a lot through that role. And I'm the daughter of somebody who uses a wheelchair and have, been learning some as I help her navigate in the world. So I'm, it's a topic that's important to me. I also have a lot of concerns about the Evergreen State College and their difficulty accommodating people with physical disabilities. So that's something we can talk about. And I've got a
Oh,
bit of a bug today, so if I disappear, that's why. Sorry.
okay. Yeah, then somehow you don't have quite your usual spark there, and that must be why. Do you want to
Yeah.
call on somebody else?
Oh, sure. I'll call on Emily.
Hello there, I'm Emily Meyerding. I'm from Olympia Friends Meeting, she, her, and I've just recently gotten my disabled permit because I'm getting my hip replaced. So it's new for me in that sense. Now, I have worked in the capital D deaf community previously, so I do have some experience working with people who are considered to be less than fully functional and how they absolutely detest that kind of labeling. And I came here today because I'm interested in learning what everybody else has done and see how we could do it better.
And would you like to call on somebody?
Uh, Verna.
Hi, friends. I got half of my intro and my name up there. I'm here today because I am very interested in how Tacoma Friends can be more accommodating and welcoming to all people. We recently brought in some comfort measures for people who are neurodiverse, um, such as noise dampening headphones, fidget toys that are not distracting, fleece blanket, cushion that you can sit on the floor in case you don't want to sit in a chair, some things like that. And then today's topic, one thing I liked about calling it mobility, vision, and hearing challenges is that that's much more specific. That immediately lets you know or gives you a direction to go in as far as accommodations. So that was something I appreciated. And how about Theo?
You're muted.
Sorry, member of South Seattle Friends Meeting, and as Susan mentioned, I'm on the Addressing Harm with Care Working Group as well, and here in solidarity, but also I myself have some hearing loss, and it's a concern for me when I'm in any Quaker gathering to hear other people often there are microphones. They don't really fully do the job. I don't know what the answer is, but I know one of the things that is extremely irritating is when people use a microphone, but they don't use it properly, or they drop their voices and begin to whisper, at which point even a microphone doesn't help that. So some of it is educating people, and it's a constant thing that needs to happen. You can't just say it once because people have their speaking habits that are ingrained, and it's hard for them to project. So there's that. And my partner, Lorna, has vision challenges. And so, for example, in the middle of a presentation, let's say from the finance committee or from the treasurer, Heidi, who's the treasurer of our group, and this doesn't pertain necessarily just to Quaker organizations, but also other organizations that hold Zoom meetings, and they project something on the screen of a computer because they want to talk about it. And if you're vision challenged, it's really hard to see what's on the screen. And Heidi, it wasn't as much of an issue the last time you presented your report. It seemed pretty clear you could blow it up, but oftentimes that's not the case. And I know there are others who attend annual session who have other difficulties reading the screen, and they need a document to read, or making type bigger. Anyway, so those are some experiences that I've had, and uh, we just have to keep working at it, I think, and trying to hear from people who have these issues so that we can make it better.
I'm sure we want to do that. And Max is the only person who hasn't spoken yet, but Max, we don't know whether actually you're there. If you could unmute and speak or put something in the chat if anyone has any accommodation needs that have not been met by our setup here, now is a good time to let us know. All right, so we will see what's happening with Matt. I just wanted to kind of commend this video from last year's session to you, and I will send out the link, I think, by email afterwards for it. It was led by Jerry Evergreen and Rain Warden, who are South Seattle friends, both of whom have very limited mobility and were wonderful leaders in alerting all of us to um, the some of the things that happen in relation to the experience of being in a wheelchair, which is one of our forms of differences in ability that we're talking about. And they talked about three different kinds of reactions that they get from friends. One level is it's weird, whatever that difference is. I don't like it, and I don't want to deal with it. So, and those are the folks who just back off. A second level that they talked about is when someone sees a person with this different ability as an object of pity or charity, and just really want to help. That's the major um, impulse there. And then the third level is friends who see everyone as just people. Everyone has differences, and we work with and interact with those differences in the way that they appear. That seemed to me like a really useful set of concepts for thinking about how we react. Um, do any of you have any experiences that you want to report either from your home meetings or from annual session that um, that indicate?
When you were talking, I was reminded of a study they did in the UK some years ago where they took a couple of people and they had crutches and they also had packages or a wheelchair and they had difficulties. And they did this in several different cities and rural locations all over the UK. And they charted the differences in people's reactions to being there with these people who were having difficulties. And they found that the more urban and the more um, upscale the neighborhood it was, the less people helped. And when questioned about it afterwards, a lot of them said, "Well, I've been told not to help people because they don't want to be helped, and I that's my excuse." And so it's a difficult thing to chart sometimes. This afternoon, I'm going to be going to a concert at San Michelle, Bob Dylan actually, and the people told me when I asked about parking, said because we're being dropped off, and said, "Well, when you get to the parking place and the attendant asks you what you're doing, you say you're dropping off an ADA attendee, and where's the best place to do that?" And they will tell you where to go. I'll find out if that's true or not.
Um, yeah. Other experiences?
We're in the process at Tacoma Friends of going down the checklist of things to do around the meeting house. We have both of our bathrooms are non-gendered, and one of them is wide enough for a wheelchair to go through. But our front porch area to get into the meeting house is not very wheelchair accessible. A person in a wheelchair would need to go up directly from one side, probably with assistance from someone to help them get, because it's kind of rough for about this much retraction so that people, don't slip, I guess. But that's not very wheelchair friendly. And so they're talking about how to make it more wheelchair friendly. And we're also I need to look into, or someone needs to look into whether or not we're legally required to have designated handicap parking for a church parking lot, because we don't have any designated parking spaces. It's the street, which is the city, and that dirt driveway that goes up to our meeting house.
Mhm.
Um, but if we're supposed to have something like that, we want to have that. We kind of have an informal, you get to park close to the door. That's about as far as it goes.
At Olympia Friends Meeting, they have headphones for hearing impaired people, and they have microphones but it's been discovered that nobody knows how to turn it on or make it work. So we're trying to figure that out and educate the people who are there helping, basically greeters and so forth, who can turn on that equipment, make it available, and provide it to the people who might ask for it.
Mm. If it's okay, we have one microphone that sits in the middle of the circle so that the people on Zoom can listen in. And that meets with varying degrees of success. So I'm not sure what else we could do. People complained about sitting on, we have it under a little small table. People complained about having it on top of the table because that looked like we were worshiping technology or something like that. So they didn't like that. Um, but we had to pay attention to people's sensibilities, but it's kind of a work in progress as far as how we do that. Accommodate the hearing, for people on Zoom and in the meeting room.
Well, speaking as somebody who's been a sound engineer at various venues, microphones are peculiar things and they listen to people's voices differently. Some people's voices, they can talk and they sound like they're shouting. Other people, they can think they're shouting and the microphone hardly hears them. And it's maddening to try and get something that's good for everybody.
I know we have two microphones at South Seattle. Uh, Usually one for the facilitator, the clerk, and then the other one is passed around the room. And I do have to say, I find it helpful to understand when there's a transcript that's a live transcript on the Zoom screen, because as I mentioned, for the people who drop their voices, or the mic isn't really picking up what they're saying, somehow it does pick it up enough to make the transcript so that you can see the words. But the hilarious thing, sometimes hilarious, sometimes
Mhm.
you have to wonder, is that the transcript picks up words. I can think of the last time we were there, and someone was talking about an issue that had been raised. It was vocal ministry, and they were talking about someone who was masquerading, but the
Oh dear.
transcript came off as masturbating. You know, anyway, it makes for some humorous moments. It's not a perfect system, but that does help,
Mhm.
that transcript.
I did have to explain one time to my colleagues, well, despite what it just said in the transcript, I am not pregnant.
Right?
Those microphones at South Seattle are really strictly for the transcript. Like they don't actually amplify anything in
Right.
the room itself. And to Emily's point about the technology, I think there seems to be limits to how much equipment the volunteers can set up in the morning because
Mhm.
we rent from a senior center, so we can't just leave it all out. And so this is what's working right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't help in the room. And Theo mentioned earlier about people not knowing how to use microphones. It is hard because some people, you don't want to be rude. Somebody's introducing themselves, but there's like, hold it closer, speak louder, all these
Mhm.
things. And some people can do it and some people can't. You tell them to hold it
Mhm.
closer and they still can't seem to hold it closer. So it's hard. In terms of physical accessibility, I think we're pretty good at South Seattle because we rent a senior center. And
Okay.
so there's no steps, no thresholds. There is an accessible bathroom, but it's not the obvious ones right by the door. So I don't know if every visitor knows where the accessible bathroom is, but our regulars, I think, do. So yeah, it's worked out well for us. But to talk about physical differences for a minute, it's been interesting navigating the world with my mom in her wheelchair. She now has quite a heavy wheelchair to push. It's a tilting wheelchair. And just the smallest lip in the sidewalk, will make a difference and make it really difficult. And
Mhm.
people don't think about that if they're not using a wheelchair.
Mhm.
And then taking her to appointments and things like that, and being out in the world, the little time we do, there are times when people do this stereotypical thing of talking to me instead of talking to my mother. And I have to remember to turn to her and say, Mom, do you want to answer that question? As she's gotten older and had some cognitive decline, sometimes I do need to answer the question, but I like to give her the chance first. This isn't so much the doctors as it is just other people we encounter in the world on the way and checking in and that sort of thing. But it's something to be aware of. A little bit of an assumption that somebody who has a physical disability also has an intellectual disability or isn't
Mhm.
able
Right.
to speak for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's probably at Rain's level one. That disability is weird. I don't like it, so I don't want to deal with it. So I will just ignore the person who looks or sounds or is acting in some way that's different and deal with somebody else who looks more like me if that person is available.
If I can offer a cautionary tale about dealing with someone who's in a wheelchair, when I was active in nursing, um, I had a patient who was accompanied by a gentleman, and the age difference between the two of them looked decades, plural.
Mhm.
And so I welcomed him and her both, and then I said, "Is this your mom?" It was his wife.
Mhm.
And I had made the
Mhm.
mistake of assuming something about the person in the wheelchair, but her illness basically had aged how she looked.
Mhm.
Well, she broke down and cried. I had to get down on my knees in front of
Gosh.
her and apologize in the middle
Oh,
of the
God.
hospital lobby, um,
Oh, no.
to help her feel treated with,
Mhm.
appropriate, apologetic
Mhm.
respect. And what did I learn a lesson out of that?
Mhm.
We just can't make assumptions when we see someone in a
Mhm.
wheelchair and think they're something, less than maybe what they are.
I
Yeah.
always remember the story Ted Danson told when he was doing Cheers. His hair had already gone white, but they always colored it for the show. So he'd be at a grocery store buying food or something, and someone would go up, "Are you Ted Danson's father?"
Really. Well, I know at South Seattle, one of the things that we have had, I haven't heard much from it lately, is a committee that really pays attention to um, these kinds of mobility, vision, and hearing issues. They're supposed that was the idea. I think it hasn't been meeting as much lately, but it's useful, I think, to have a group of people in a meeting or whatever setting it is that really does pay attention to these issues, so that it isn't like there's just a complaint and then it kind of lingers and nobody really does anything about it. Um, the other thing that I'm remembering, and this has to do with annual session, I was remembering, I think it was last year, or last year probably, Matteo Hansen. I was thinking of mobility issues and the problem. Of course, we're limited by what the facility actually presents to us. I recognize that, but I thought it was really a hard thing for anyone with mobility challenges. There was no way to get into that I could detect to get into the dining room unless you had to go around the building and find a way back in. And I don't know that that was posted anywhere initially. It might have been, or people knew about it later, but um, it's sort of like a respect issue. It's a you know, you have to go to the back door. It's like you're the servant. You have to go on the servant's entrance. It's just if there are ways in any setting, any Quaker setting or any setting where we can make that better, that it would be a good thing.
Remember Michael Flanders of Swan and Flanders? Back in the 60s, they did a review and they performed it in New York and in London. And Michael Flanders said that when they went to put him in the wheelchair, when he was in his wheelchair and they went to put him in his plane, they got a forklift and lifted him up to the door of the plane to put him in.
Wow.
That was before ADA, of course, like 1959. So and thinking about wheelchairs and other kinds of mobility things like that. One thing that can really screw things up is having little bits of bark or gravel that are on an otherwise nice, even, uh, perfectly fine surface. Because we've all run into things like that in the grocery store pushing a cart where you come across something and one of the wheels stops. It can be a
Mhm.
real unpleasant surprise.
At least that in the story about the forklift, at least they had the forklift and they got him to the door.
But think how
Um,
high a 707 door is. I mean,
do
how,
you remember Senator Max Cleland? The name is
Mhm.
coming back to me.
Yeah.
I don't know what state he was from. Does anybody else remember this
I
story?
remember the
But
name.
Mhm.
he was a like a Vietnam vet
Mhm.
and was in a wheelchair and his
Mhm.
legs didn't work at all.
Mhm.
And they told him he had to walk onto a plane.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
he ended up having to like butt his way up a set of steps
God.
and crawl backwards, pulling himself with his arms. And I
Mhm.
Oh, God.
believe he was a US Senator at the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
that this
Geez.
happened. That was so,
Mhm,
hopefully those are the bad old days.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, and that ADA has
Mhm,
actually made a difference in terms of those
mhm.
physical accommodations.
Yeah.
But the attitudes question
Mhm,
is a really important one. Although one of the things I'm hearing is I like Theo pointing out just having a committee that worries about these things is can be a really important
mhm,
step because then that committee will think about welcoming people into a particular physical
mhm,
space. I had the experience at, well, our quarterly meeting site, and we're actually all, I think, from PNQM and have probably all been to Lazy F at some point, just notoriously difficult. I mean, people just, there are people who can't go anymore because it's too hard to navigate. But when we were there in the spring, we were shifting from the plenary to a set of breakout groups of worship groups, I guess. And there was somebody standing in the plenary room, kind of looking confused. And she said, "Well, I'm supposed to be, my worship group is right down underneath us downstairs. I don't know how to get there because there were,
mhm,
because she couldn't do steps.
mhm,
Mhm.
She ended up doing a few steps, but she couldn't do the number that was there. So just the notion of letting people know, actually.
mhm,
And then, as I told that story later, somebody who was actually using a walker there said, "Oh, yeah, I have figured out the shortest route to get from that room to the room
mhm,
downstairs." So there's this kind of
mhm,
repertoire of coping mechanisms that builds
mhm,
up. It'd be nice to have a little repository for. We do the one thing as part of our standard procedures, which is what, uh, although it's a little bit of a pet peeve of
mhm,
mine. It's called a tray carrier, right? And the tray carrier job is one of the jobs that you can sign up for at annual
mhm,
session. You can do that at quarterly meeting. Too, the reason that it's a pet peeve of mine is because nobody has trays anymore. The
mhm,
college cafeterias don't have trays anymore, so they're not really tray carriers. We figured out that this person should just be called an extra hand,
mhm,
um, which is about what people need. Um, so we do a lot actually already, but it's sounding like there's actually another step that we could go to really get into that full respect and inclusion kind of place. Verna, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I've actually heard multiple people, since you brought it up, complain about access at Lazy F. And I wonder, are we under contract or something like that, that there's no option of finding a place that's more accessible that would still be kind of centrally located?
Hmm, that's probably a longer conversation than we want to go in here. Heidi may have an idea of where that discussion stands. My understanding of it is that Lazy F is so fabulous for kids that
mhm,
they that there's been a great reluctance in terms of
mhm,
having new generations of friends coming along
mhm,
to leave Lazy F, and also the centrality
Mhm,
is not easy to replicate. You'd almost have some to have something more or less in that same area because people
mhm,
drive from Idaho and they drive from Pullman,
mhm,
Washington. There's some really long drives from the
mhm,
east to get there already, so we really couldn't move it too much further
mhm,
west. But someplace that would be as fun for the kids, give them as much independence as they have at Lazy F, and also welcoming for people who just can't walk. There might be more things we could do to get people in between the buildings. Um,
Yeah.
mhm,
oh,
I was
lots of
wondering.
comments on that. Come on in,
mhm,
folks.
I know we can't do this because we're not the governance of that Lazy F the quarterly meeting, and I'm not that active. But I was thinking if they had a couple people who could be a committee to think through some of these things, signage for people who need direction, or
mhm,
um, But the other thing that occurred to me is, could you, if there were any way to get a golf cart out there?
Hmm. Yeah,
Because that way people who have mobility issues could more easily be transferred between the places where they're staying or
hmm.
eating
Yep.
and their dormitory or whatever. And that,
Hmm.
because it's hard with a wheelchair. There's not much in the way of paved paths
Hmm.
that really helpful, I think. That's my memory of it. Now I haven't been there for a while.
You
Yeah.
can rent those golf carts and also mobility scooters. And either of those would be a possible option as far as conveying people between different places.
Or maybe a simple intermediary step would just be having a few people who their volunteer job is to escort people who have
Mhm.
difficulties and make sure that whatever they need,
Something
they
like
have.
that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that would be a low barrier way to help.
Mhm.
And if people have gotten there, they've probably gotten there in a car.
Mhm.
And we've got plenty of cars that could drive in between the buildings,
True.
actually.
And I have seen friends in the past use that method. That friends will stay in the one dorm that has some accessible rooms
Mhm.
and then drive between there and the other
Yep.
halls. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, I've seen it done, but I think a golf cart's a good idea. That has come up in the past, but I'm not sure where it's gone. I think the quarterly meeting is so used to being a low budget kind of shoestring operation,
Yep.
the
Mhm.
assessments are very low, that
Mhm.
I think people haven't kind of
Mhm.
thought seriously about something as expensive as renting a golf cart.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
why I was thinking low barrier things might just be a volunteer category to
Mhm.
escort people.
Hmm.
No
Yeah.
charge.
Lazy F also is pretty damn affordable. That's
Hmm.
probably a lot of that goes into that decision as far as location and cost.
And I
Yeah,
realize it's kind of outside the scope of the conversation, but on the other hand, it comes up so often.
Mhm.
it's not really out of scope at all because we did put the questions out at various levels because these are all parts of our community, all these
Mhm.
various experiences that we offer in our local meetings, in our quarterly meetings,
Mhm.
and at annual session. And I'm sure that Heidi's taking
Mhm.
mental notes here on things that she wants to make sure that annual session is paying attention to. They did have a big oops this year when they realized how few ADA accessible bathrooms there are in the dormitories at
Wow.
Evergreen State.
That's
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a
It's
huge problem. I mean, as we know, things that were built before the ADA, right, are really
Mhm.
different than things after. And um, and Evergreen has the added problem of being a state-funded college in a state that is very cash poor.
Mhm.
And so when they needed to comply with the ADA, they did it the easiest way they could, which
Mhm.
was to, in their student apartment blocks, build 12 um, fully ADA accessible dorm rooms. And they're all singles. And because college students or anybody can have trouble finding short-term housing that is ADA, they allow as many of those students as who need to stay over the summer in their dormitories. And so there's 12 ADA rooms there, but we have no idea how many we'll actually have available to us. And
Mhm.
it could be as few as zero.
Mhm.
And they're all singles. And so if you have a couple where somebody can support, a partner who has a
Mhm.
disability, they couldn't in this situation. So, and then I think the site committee lost sight of this because the main dormitory that we're going to use has an elevator service. And so, great, it's accessible. It's the elevator service. But Susan is right, it's about the bathrooms. The None of those bathrooms in the big dormitory have grab bars for the toilets, and all the double rooms, they are the type where two bedrooms share a bathroom in between, but the doorways into those bathrooms are narrow.
Not wide enough. Wow.
So, and there's
nightmare.
no grab bars,
Mhm.
so we feel really stuck. And I'm going to go to the site committee meeting next time around, and they're starting to think about the future, and also tell them, depending on how this goes this year, we may not want to return to Evergreen. You know,
Mhm.
and Evergreen's the host person there is lovely. They're trying.
Mhm.
It's just that Susan knows I like to get on this soapbox about state revenue and progressive revenue. You know, we're in this state that is not investing in this kind of infrastructure, and they're probably thinking of like, well, they got their 12 ADA rooms, okay,
Mhm.
check, that box is there.
Mhm.
But in terms of guests on the campus or other, flexibility of people that might want to be in a double, there's no capacity for them to make those changes. The host even told me this isn't related to ADA, but to give an idea of the problems that the Evergreen has an Olympic sized pool that needs a lot of maintenance and like in the millions of dollars. And the state decided to decommission the pool rather than to repair it
Mhm.
because the repair cost was in the millions and the cost to the state to maintain the pool is really high. And so
Mhm.
just with our state budget problems, unless it's got some last minute stay of um, demolition, they're just gonna fill in the pool because they can't.
Oh my God.
Mhm.
And the
Oh,
pool
It's
is
an
not
outdoor
only.
pool.
No, it's indoor, but it's not only important for the students, it's also an important part of the community because it's the pool that, high schools swim teams would have a meet at, that
Mhm.
kind of stuff, or they have some open
Mhm.
community times when people in the community can come and swim, and all that's gone. Like,
Oh.
unless it got some last minute stay, but
hmm.
because the state can't afford it, so.
Mhm.
So Evergreen is lovely. It's a beautiful
Mhm.
campus, and any newer building is ADA, and
Mhm.
there's elevators and there's paved
Mhm.
paths and all those things. But there's just this big gap in terms of housing, and they're stuck. I don't think they want to have
Mhm.
their site be that inaccessible. But
Well, it would create problems not only for us, but for anybody that wants to rent, or use the
Mhm.
thing for a conference.
exactly,
But one of the things I
exactly.
was thinking as you were talking is, would it be possible to somehow arrange for off-campus housing for folks with disabilities who couldn't be accommodated for annual session? I
Mhm.
know that doesn't solve the problem of, I have to go to the bathroom right now. It's between the worship group and the plenary because that you wouldn't have a bathroom available. But just for the nighttime and anyway, it's just a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Well, the bathrooms, I mean, there are accessible bathrooms in the buildings with the plenaries and with the worship group. So
Mhm.
that's okay. It's about the housing, and we have talked about it in the registration form and then linked to the hotels, right? So the assumption is that the person would pay for the hotel instead of paying for their dormitory room. The
Mhm.
assumption also is that person has somebody, they can drive themselves or they have
Or gifts,
somebody
yeah.
who can go with them and drive them,
Mhm.
so there's other barriers. Yeah, we are probably gonna bring some toilet rails that can be put in a bathroom, and that can help. The doorway widths can still be
Mhm.
an issue, but I think in the singles in the high-rise dormitory,
Mhm.
the doorways are a little wider. So uh, hopefully at this next site visit, we'll get a little better sense of that. But
Yeah, if you can't do grab bars and things like that because of limitations, you can also get a toilet topper, something that is a seat that's higher and also has handrails, and
mm-hmm,
that just
Yeah,
sits
this
over the
is
toilet, and that
mm-hmm,
can be that can be a lifesaver for somebody in that situation.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we have to be careful with anything that requires installation.
Mhm.
Our host was like, I don't know that you can install,
The
so
toilet topper just sits there, and you can take it away with you. So
Yeah.
Doesn't need
And
to
I
be
think we
installed.
think a lot of people have those actually
Yeah.
because a lot of families have had to use them at
Yeah.
some point and then they
Right.
just go
Mm-hmm.
in a
And
closet.
some bread were between $50 and $100, depending on what kind you get.
Mm-hmm. And the toilet rails are the same. You can get these ones that they
Yeah.
kind of look like a walker, but they go
Mhm.
around the toilet and they don't they don't have to be installed. So
Oh, that's good.
yeah, so I think between those two kind of things, and we're trying to ask the questions in the registration form, so we'll have a sense of what the need is
Mhm.
and that we can make sure that the friends that need that have it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's going to be messy.
Mhm.
Mm.
Thank you
And
for
then
all that work though, Heidi.
it's important to have somebody try it out too, because I remember taking a friend somewhere and she disappeared, and I realized she'd gone to the restroom, and I went and found her, and she was sitting there, and she said, I can't reach the toilet paper.
Oh,
I had to go and get her some and
wow.
give it to
Every
her. So,
detail.
Oh,
but
Yeah.
just, I'm stuck. I can't go. I don't want to get up. It's soiled and
Yeah. Oh,
Another low barrier thing, I'm big on low barriers, is
Mhm,
have you seen those kinds of canes where they have the 4 feet on them, like a little
mhm,
square and it's 4 feet?
mhm,
If you had a few of those around and a person could use that to help themselves get up or down when they're
mhm,
at the toilet, that's pretty steady and
mhm.
it's very mobile.
Yep.
I use one at home.
it's a
indeed.
good
Lots
idea.
of good ideas. Yeah. So actually, none of us then has been coping with one of these disabilities ourselves or the so-called disabilities.
I,
Um,
I, I have some mobility challenges myself,
Mhm,
not all the time, every place, but like I said, there's there are times, like regularly when I use a cane. And then that one with the 4 feet is one that's real handy for me at times when
mhm,
I'm having trouble getting up and down because that's so steady. I can lean on it hard and it doesn't
mhm.
give away. So that's personal experience.
I'm going to be investing in a stair lift for my house where I live down on the coast because I'm having mobility issues, and after I have my hip replaced, I'll really have mobility issues about a long straight staircase. And my housemate also had Guillain-Barré syndrome and has difficulty with walking oftentimes, and sometimes she has to crawl up the stairs. So that'll help both of us.
Well, my wife is about to have knee replacement surgery.
Mm,
So,
Uh,
yeah, it's a new
mhm,
world there. I
one
wanted
at
to
a time,
mention,
hopefully.
yes, one at a time,
mhm,
what Theo was talking about vision and the difficulty seeing things on Zoom.
mhm,
There's a friend in our meeting with vision difficulties, and there's a friend in our co-housing community with vision
mhm,
difficulties. And they really appreciate it when people can email them in advance things that are going to be put on a screen.
mhm,
And then they can accommodate themselves if they have it. So, like, they could put on their own screen, and magnify. Or our neighbor who's fully blind, she has a braille printer and can
mhm,
print out attachments, depending on the kind of attachment. And then she can read along during the meeting and she'll bring her papers with her. So giving materials in advance can be really valuable.
mhm.
Um,
I think
so
that's
what,
been, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, when I have said I'm making a report at the meeting, Theo, I've sent the report in advance, and sometimes it gets emailed out to everybody, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think it
Well,
helps if it does.
you were able to blow it up enough so that it was able to be read, but in many instances, that's not the case. But I recall again from one or two annual sessions ago that there's sort of a protocol that papers and documents that are coming up for at annual session and are going to be on a screen like a financial report are mailed out to I know, for example, Doreen Cornwell has vision issues and she has asked that send those things to her. I don't know if it's done regularly for people that request it or how it works, but I know there was an issue that where she said she had not gotten the documents that were supposed to be sent to her, and it really makes a big difference. She has to have her own reader, I think, and I don't know if I think on the register, is there on the registration form anything that indicates who would require something like that? And, if you need any assistance, like a reader, like, sending out the doc, whatever it is. Um, I can't recall. I just registered, but I can't recall that particular part. But I mean, that would be helpful. At least that way the admin would know who needs what, because not everybody does. And anyway, that I think that would be useful.
I think it
This is
is there. And I also think there is a place on the annual session website for documents to be put. I'm not 100% sure about that.
this is
As
inspiring me
long as the
to
person is aware that that's happening.
Yeah. Sorry, Verna.
this is inspiring me to for our documents, especially for like business meeting, to um, print out a few large print and have on hand at the meeting. We do have a couple elderly people who don't have printers at home,
The
and
other
printing
thing.
it out and bringing it with them wouldn't work for them. Um, and that feels again like a small low barrier kind of thing that we could do that would be helpful for them.
Yeah, the
So
place where I've seen that it can get neglected at annual session is when there are things that are produced in one session and then used in the next one. For instance, if you're trying to read minutes,
Mhm.
then you need a few extra minutes to get the minutes posted on the website so that they can be found. And that is something that the annual session is such a hustle bustle sort of
Mhm.
time. And the people at the head table in particular are hustling and
I
bustling.
know.
And I think that's something that's easy to neglect, but really crucial. And that's the kind of habit that we can get into so that because where it becomes a microaggression is if the person has to ask over and over again
Exactly.
um, for it. And that, if any of you haven't watched our cute little 3-minute microaggressions
Mhm.
video, the point of it is that it's one thing if this happens once, and for people in whatever that circumstance is, it happens over and over and over again. And then that's when something that might initially be a hurt really builds into harm.
Mhm.
Well, another thing, just along those same lines, I remember in the neurodivergence learning session that we held, there was a young woman who said, the kind of lighting is a problem for me in our meeting. And I mentioned it to someone, and they basically blew me off or said, oh, you need to talk to that person, or you need to, talk to this other person. And um, I don't know exactly how to avoid that except to educate people to say, okay, let me try to deal with it and I'll contact the person, or um, take them right to the person, or instead of making light of their immediate concern, try to deal with it right away. It feels bad when somebody doesn't take seriously what it is what problem you have. And I know in a rush, an annual session, even in a meeting for worship, that can happen, but it's just something I think we just need to educate ourselves about more. Don't just pass the buck if you can avoid it.
mhm.
Yes, agreed. And so I'm puzzling over how can we build more of
Right, how
that
you would do
education
that.
in because there's only 5 of us here, as far as we know, right at the
I
moment, who
know.
are hearing
Mhm.
this wonderful advice.
Mhm.
Um,
Is your
so we'll
microaggressions
we'll
thing
just
on?
hold that and find a way.
Mhm.
Verna.
Is your microaggressions video thing you were talking about? Is there a web page on the NPYM for this reducing harm group, or that
We
where all your videos are listed like that?
um That one actually was on our resource page from last year. We can put it on the resource page again for this year.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
Along with, as long as we're on that the resource page topic, Theo had actually gathered up wonderful materials from the Unitarian Universalists that we used as background for all of these conversation sessions last year, and that is something that you can still get to. And the one on accommodations for vision, hearing, and mobility issues is very long, but there are just a few pages of it that give a list of specific accommodations that are really useful. And I printed that out for myself, but I'll make a PDF of just those pages and send it out to the people who were registered for this session as well, because it's more of a handy little guide.
Yeah, what I found working with deaf people a lot was their idea of microaggression very often was people who repeatedly and insistently wanted to help them when they didn't need or want help. And that can be really just
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, that was on Jerry at the session last year had some prompt questions, and one of them was, have you ever had a situation in which you offered help to someone you thought needed help and then got angry if they refused it? I think that's a really interesting prompt because the charity, oh, we see someone with one of these differences and we treat them as an object of charity and feel pity, and so then help is required on our part. But yes, the fun thing in Montana, I don't know whether you experienced this, Emily, or whether you've heard this story, but we were with these very large groups of Mormon kids on the campus in Montana, and they had like a daily requirement. You have to find somebody to help in some form, and we were the objects. And so anybody who looked, at something physical that indicated that they needed help, whether they needed it or not, they had a Mormon kid who came and offered. But
oh
I'm sure
dear.
that they did take no for an answer.
That reminds me of that wonderful story Stephen Fry told about going on the tour in Salt Lake City. And at one point, the tour director was telling about the afterlife and what was going to happen. Your family be all around and everything. And Stephen Fry said he held up his hand and was recognized. What if you were good?
Oh, that's
Maybe on
funny.
that note, thank you very much for this very rich session. In fact, I think we've generated a lot of ideas. I will send some resources out to you, but then let's stay in touch. We've got this
Sure.
working group that this is our
Yeah.
job,
Yep.
and it's kind of turned into a year-long job in many ways. But feel free to bring things up, send us emails.
Mhm.
With ideas or experiences, and let's keep the capability of our community addressing harm with care. Let's keep that alive as we settle into a few moments of
Susan,
closing
before we
worship.
settle in, I
Yes,
really appreciate this, but there is something else I wanted to drop in the pot, which is
go
that
ahead.
as we age, we have often more needs around these ability differences, but also our brains are less plastic and it's harder for us to learn. And I just want to drop that in there that sometimes people need, multiple reminders of why they have to use the microphone, or why somebody else might have a different need around vision than they do, or things like that. Anyway, just mentioning that because it's something I notice is is that people can be a little rigid, dismissive, like Theo had said, remembering that session, not understanding what the other needs are. So to figure out how to bring folks along.
Yes, and getting older seems to be something we're quite good at.
Now there was an interesting one of those 1950s game shows. They had a fifth anniversary show. They had their crew on and told stories about things that happened to them in their professional career. And one of the guy who was like a director said that his main claim to fame was that he failed Bing Crosby in an audition. And it was before they had microphones. And he was a bass. You couldn't hear him past the third row.
Interesting.
Oh,
Wow.
well.
Uh,
Interesting.
all kinds of dimensions of
Mm-hmm.
diversity.
Yep.
Any other closing thoughts? All
Thank you
right,
so much.
let's worship together for a bit and then go off and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.